Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into a really pivotal time, the 8 years from 1775 to 1783. This is when the American colonies formally broke away from Britain.
Yeah, and it's huge. We're looking at more than just a war. It's really the birth of a nation. And we need to remember, this wasn't some unified uprising, not at all.
Yeah.
It was deeply divisive.
Right.
You could almost call it America's first civil war. Loyalties were split right down the middle. Unity. Definitely not universal.
And the sheer scale of the physical change is staggering.
Duh.
By the end, the new United States controls this vast territory, basically from the Appalachians to the Mississippi. Doubled the size of the nation,
A
practically.
massive expansion, yeah. But it immediately brought what the source calls untold woe for the Native Americans caught in the middle. So our goal here is to walk you through this revolution step by step. We'll look at how the Patriots managed to win against, frankly, incredible odds.
It seems like a mix of factors, right? French help, leadership.
Absolutely. French aid was critical, strong leadership like Washington's, but also these radical new ideas about freedom, popular rule, and those unalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Okay, so let's dive in. April 1775, Lexington and Concord happens. What's the immediate fallout?
Well, it's pretty explosive. About 20,000 local militia, the Minutemen, just spontaneously converge on Boston. They effectively trap the British troops inside the city.
Wow, 20,000. That's a huge number just showing up.
It really is. And this forces the hand of the Second Continental Congress, meeting in Philadelphia that May. But what's really interesting, even with an army forming outside Boston, there's still no clear consensus for independence. Not yet.
So what were they aiming for?
Primarily a redress of grievances. They're still sending appeals to King George III, but at the same time, they're taking steps to raise an army, create a navy. It leads to this really strange 14-month period, a curious war of inconsistency, as the text calls it.
Fighting, but still appealing to the king. Okay. And during this weird phase, they make a massive decision. George Washington to lead the army. Why him? It sounds like it wasn't just about military skill.
Not primarily, no. It was very political. Washington was this, dignified Virginia planter, a former colonel. Choosing him helped smooth over some New England jealousies. It showed this wasn't just a Massachusetts fight.
Broadening the appeal.
Exactly. Plus, his wealth meant nobody could easily accuse him of trying to make a fortune from the war. And his aristocratic background, that reassured some of the more conservative elements who were nervous about, well, mob rule.
The book notes he wasn't necessarily a military genius, lost more battles than he won, actually.
True, but his strength was character, immense moral force. He held the army together through sheer will sometimes, and he famously insisted on serving without pay.
Though he did keep a very detailed expense account, apparently over $100,000.
He did indeed, meticulous records. But okay, things heat up dramatically in June 75. Bunker Hill, which, funnily enough, was mostly fought on Breed's Hill.
Right, the naming confusion. What happened there?
Colonists grabbed this hill overlooking Boston. The British decide on a full frontal assault. 3,000 men. It was a terrible blunder.
A blow-them bath.
Absolutely. The American sharpshooters just devastated the advancing redcoats. The colonists only had to pull back when they literally ran out of gunpowder. It was that close.
And the British won't, but at a huge cost. I remember reading the French foreign minister supposedly said something like, 2 more victories like that, and the British Army in America would be gone.
That's the one. A very costly victory. But it didn't change King George III's mind. In August 75, he flatly rejects the Olive Branch Petition.
So no more reconciliation talk.
None. He declares the colonies in open rebellion. That means anyone fighting is committing treason. And then the kicker. He hires thousands of German mercenaries, Hessians.
The Hessian flies.
Yeah.
That must have really stung.
It was a massive shock. Colonists saw this as a family dispute, Bringing in paid foreign soldiers felt like a betrayal of that. And 75 ends with another move that sort of undermines their whole, we're just defending ourselves argument.
The invasion of Canada.
Right. A two-pronged attack. Richard Montgomery takes Montreal. Benedict Arnold leads this incredibly grueling march through Maine. His men end up eating dogs, shoe leather, just desperate.
Grim stuff.
Yeah. The final assault on Quebec fails. Montgomery's killed, Arnold's wounded. It was a bold offensive move, but it directly contradicted their claims of fighting defensively.
So that inconsistency starts to crumble in 1776, especially after some harsh British actions.
Definitely. The burning of Falmouth, Maine, and Norfolk, Virginia, those acts really pushed more colonists towards the idea of a complete break.
And then comes Thomas Paine, Common Sense, January 76. This sounds like it was a game changer.
Oh, absolutely. Paine was a recent immigrant from Britain and just a brilliant communicator. He basically called the colonists' hesitation illogical. Nonsense.
What was his core argument?
He cut right through the redress of grievances talk. He asked, why should this tiny island Britain rule a vast continent like America? It just didn't make sense. And he didn't hold back on the king either. Called him the royal brute of Great Britain.
Wow. Strong words.
Very. And Paine did something else radical. He wasn't just calling for independence. He was calling for a republic.
Okay, unpack that. What did republic mean in this context?
It meant a society where power comes from the people, not a king. Where your talent matters more than who your father was. Hereditary privilege. Out. Individual merit. In.
That sounds revolutionary in itself.
It was doubly radical, independence and a whole new form of government. And a lot of colonists, especially in New England with their town meetings and committees of correspondence, they were kind of primed for this idea.
They had some experience with local self-rule.
Exactly. But Paine added a crucial requirement for this republic to work: civic virtue. The idea that citizens had to be willing to sacrifice their own self-interest for the good of the whole.
That sounds like a high bar. Did everyone buy into that?
Not entirely. Some patriots worried about runaway republicanism, maybe too much democracy, Some preferred a sort of natural aristocracy rule by the talented, the capable.
So even among patriots, there were different ideas about what this new nation should look like.
Definitely. And the question of who counted as the people was immediately present. There's that fascinating letter from Abigail Adams to her husband, John, asking him to remember the ladies when making new laws. It shows that conversation about inclusion started right at the beginning.
Okay, so the mood is shifting rapidly. By summer 76, things come to a head.
They do. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia introduces a motion in Congress, basically says these colonies are and ought to be free and independent states. It's formally adopted on July 2nd, 1776.
July 2nd? I thought it was July 4th.
Well, the vote was July 2nd, but they knew they needed a formal explanation, a justification to the world for this massive step.
Enter Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. Approved July 4th.
Exactly. And it's described brilliantly as the world's greatest editorial. Jefferson didn't just talk about the rights of Englishmen. He invoked universal natural rights: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness rights belonging to all humankind.
And he lists the king's offenses to justify the split.
A long list. Taxes without consent, keeping standing armies, hiring mercenaries, inciting Native Americans against them, all framed as tyrannical acts.
But there was a significant change from his original draft, wasn't there? Yeah. Something about slavery.
Yes, a crucial detail. Jefferson had originally included a passage blaming King George III for the slave trade, but that clause was removed by Congress before the final adoption.
Wow. Even at the founding moment, that compromise.
It highlights the deep contradictions right from the start. So with the Declaration official, the lines are clearly drawn. It's Patriots, also called Whigs, versus Loyalists or Tories.
And we have to remember, this wasn't everyone picking a side, right?
Not at all. The revolution was, in many ways, a minority movement. A large chunk of the colonial population was apathetic, neutral, or just wanted to be left alone.
So who are the Loyalists, generally speaking?
They made up maybe 16% of the population. Often they were from the older generation, people with direct ties to the crown, like royal officers, Anglican clergy. Also more common in big port cities like New York or Charleston. They were least numerous in New England.
And the Patriots? How do they win over the undecided or counter the Loyalists?
A key tool was the militia. These weren't just fighting units. They were agents of political education, sometimes using persuasion, sometimes, coercion. They convinced the wavering and constantly harassed small British forces.
And what happened to the Loyalists after the Declaration?
It got much harder for them. About 80,000 eventually fled or were driven out. Their property, their estates were often confiscated, which actually helped finance the Patriot War effort.
So a real internal conflict alongside the war against Britain.
Absolutely. And the complexity comes through in stories like that of Boston King. He was an enslaved man in South Carolina who escaped to the British lines and found freedom under their protection, a black loyalist. His story shows just how tangled loyalties and the meaning of freedom could be.
Okay, so declaration signed, lines drawn. But militarily, things looked pretty bleak for the Americans in the summer of 76.
Extremely bleak. This is probably the low point for the cause. The British assembled this massive force in New York, 35,000 soldiers, 500 ships. It's the largest military force seen in North America until the Civil War.
And the battles reflected that disparity.
Oh, yeah. Disaster strikes at the Battle of Long Island. The Americans are completely routed. Washington manages this narrow escape, ferries his troops across the East River to Manhattan under the cover of fog, but then he's forced to retreat again, across New Jersey, abandoning New York City to the British. Things looked really bad.
But Washington pulls something out of the hat, the famous crossing of the Delaware.
Exactly. This is where Old Fox Washington really shines. Christmas night, 1776, he leads his men stealthily back across the ice-choked Delaware River. Total surprise attack on the Hessian garrison at Trenton, captures 1,000 men.
A huge morale boost.
Massive. And then, just over a week later, he does it again, slips away from the main British army, and scores another victory at Princeton. These 2 wins were absolutely critical. They saved the cause when it seemed on the verge of collapse.
So a bit of breathing room. Then comes 1777 and a major British plan, Burgoyne's invasion.
Right. The British strategy was ambitious. Cut off New England from the rest of the colonies by seizing control of the entire Hudson River Valley. The plan involved 3 separate forces converging.
3 forces. Sounds complex.
It was. Burgoyne coming south from Canada, another force under St. Leger coming from the west, and General Howe supposed to come north up the Hudson from New York City. And we should give Benedict Arnold some credit here. His actions on Lake Champlain back in '76 had actually delayed the British advance, buying precious time for the Americans.
But the plan hits a snag. A big one, involving General Howe.
A huge one. Instead of marching north to meet Burgoyne as planned, Howe decides to sail south and capture Philadelphia, the rebel capital.
Why? That seems counterintuitive to the main strategy.
It remains a bit baffling. Maybe overconfidence, maybe wanting his own glory. He did defeat Washington in battles at Brandywine Creek and Germantown, occupied Philly, and then settled in for a comfortable winter there.
While Washington's army is where?
At Valley Forge. And this is the image many people have. The Continental Army at its absolute lowest. Freezing, starving, lacking basic supplies, rampant disease, just misery.
But something important happens there too, right?
Yes. Amidst the suffering, this Prussian officer, Baron von Steuben, arrives. He might not have been the high-ranking general he claimed, but he knew how to drill soldiers. He takes this ragged group and starts whipping them into a disciplined, professional fighting force.
And he noticed something interesting about the American soldiers.
He did. He apparently noted that unlike European soldiers who just followed orders, Americans needed to know why. They needed the reason behind the command. A fascinating insight into the American character, maybe.
Meanwhile, what happened to Burgoyne, waiting up north for Howe?
He gets bogged down, his supply lines are stretched, American militia are harassing him constantly. He's essentially surrounded near Albany. And on October 17, 1777, he's forced to surrender his entire army at the Battle of Saratoga.
Saratoga. That sounds like the turning point.
It absolutely was. Huge boost for American morale, obviously. But even more importantly, it convinced France that the Americans actually had a chance to win. And that unlocked the door to crucial foreign aid. Saratoga really changed the international dimension. Before that, back in '76, Congress had drafted this kind of idealistic document called the Model Treaty.
Model Treaty. What was the idea?
It was pretty radical for the time. It basically said America only wanted commercial connections with other countries. No political alliances, no military ties, just trade. It was this utopian vision of replacing power politics with, well, international law and free trade.
A nice idea, but maybe not realistic in 18th century Europe.
Exactly. Reality hit when Benjamin Franklin got to Paris. He was brilliant. He knew France was itching for revenge against Britain after the 7 Years' War.
So he played on that.
Skillfully. He also played on French fears that Britain might just offer the Americans home rule within the empire and reconcile. Franklin became this sort of sensation in Paris, dressing plainly, wearing a fur cap, embodying the simple, virtuous American republic. It worked.
And France signs on.
They do. The Franco-American alliance is official on February 6, 1778. And this changes everything. Suddenly, Britain isn't just fighting rebellious colonists, it's a world war.
Who else joins in against Britain?
France is first in 78, then Spain in 79, Holland also in 79. Even Russia gets involved by organizing the Armed Neutrality, basically a group of neutral countries protecting their shipping rights against the British Navy. Britain is suddenly diplomatically isolated and fighting on multiple fronts.
And the French contribution wasn't just symbolic, right?
Oh, far from it. French money, supplies, troops, and crucially, naval power. By the end, France provided about half of the regular soldiers fighting on the American side, and virtually all the naval support needed to challenge the Royal Navy.
Okay, so with the war expanding, Britain changes its strategy on the ground in America.
Yes, they shift their focus to the south. The thinking was that there were more Loyalists down there who could help them regain control.
Did it work?
Initially, it seemed to. They captured Savannah, then Charleston fell in 1780, a major blow to the Americans. But then came General Nathaniel Greene for the Americans.
The fighting quick.
That's him. He employed this brilliant strategy of delay. He knew he couldn't always win head-on battles against the British commander, Cornwallis. So he led Cornwallis on this exhausting chase across the Carolinas. Stand, fight, retreat, stand, fight, retreat. He lost battles, technically, but he won the campaign by wearing down the British army.
While this is happening in the South, what about the frontier?
Still very active. Many Native American groups, like the Iroquois Confederacy, led by figures such as Mohawk Chief Joseph Brant, sided with the British.
Why the British?
They figured correctly that a British victory was their best hope of stopping American settlers from pushing further west. Sadly for them, after the war, the victorious Americans forced treaties like the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, 1784, on the Iroquois, making them give up huge amounts of land.
A tough outcome. Any American successes out west?
Yes, George Rogers Clark led a small force that managed to capture several key British forts in the Illinois country. It helped stake an American claim to that vast territory.
And what about at sea? Besides the French Navy?
The official Continental Navy was pretty small, though figures like John Paul Jones became heroes. But the real damage to British shipping came from privateers.
Privateers, so basically legal pirates.
Pretty much. Privately owned ships, armed and authorized by Congress to attack enemy merchant vessels. There were hundreds of them that captured something like 600 British ships.
That must have hurt British trade.
Immensely. It drove up insurance rates, disrupted commerce, and put a lot of economic pressure on Parliament back in London to just end the war.
Okay, so all these threads, the French alliance, the war in the South, the privateers, they all lead towards the final act.
Exactly. They lead to Yorktown, Virginia in the fall of 1781. General Cornwallis, after his frustrating campaign in the South, retreats to Yorktown on the Chesapeake Bay. He assumes the British Navy controls the sea and he can be resupplied or evacuated if needed.
A bad assumption.
A fatal one, because Admiral de Grasse, commanding a powerful French fleet, sails into the Chesapeake and blockades it, cuts off Cornwallis from the sea. At the same time, Washington, coordinating with the French army under Rochambeau, marches south rapidly and lays siege to Yorktown by land.
Cornwallis is trapped.
Completely trapped, outnumbered, outgunned, no escape route. He has no choice but to surrender his entire force of about 7,000 men on October 19th, 1781.
And the famous story about the band playing The World turned upside down.
That's the legend. Whether it actually happened or not, it perfectly captures the moment. It was a stunning victory, and importantly, a joint Franco-American triumph.
So Yorktown is the decisive blow, militarily. Does the fighting stop immediately?
Not entirely, but it effectively ends the major campaigns. News reaches London, and Lord North's government, which had prosecuted the war, finally collapses. King George III wanted to keep fighting, apparently, but Parliament had had enough.
So new government, new approach. Time for peace talks.
Exactly. The Whigs, who were generally more sympathetic to the American cause, come to power. Peace negotiations begin in Paris. The American team is Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay. A strong lineup.
But the negotiations weren't straightforward, were they? Especially with France involved.
No, it was complicated. France had achieved its goal, weakening Britain by helping America gain independence. But now, French interests started to diverge.
Yeah.
They didn't necessarily want a strong United States.
Why not?
Well, a weaker America, maybe confined east of the Allegheny Mountains, would be more dependent on France. Plus, France had made promises to its ally, Spain, primarily about getting Gibraltar back from Britain, and Spain also had claims to territory west of the Appalachians.
Ah, so competing interests among the allies.
Big time. And John Jay, one of the American negotiators, picked up on this. He became deeply suspicious that the French foreign minister was willing to basically sell out American claims to the western lands to appease Spain.
That sounds like a potential betrayal. What did Jay do?
He took a huge risk. Against his explicit instructions from Congress to consult closely with the French, Jay made secret, separate approaches to the British negotiators in London.
Going behind France's back.
Essentially, yes. He figured a direct deal with Britain might get America better terms, especially regarding the Western territories.
Did it work?
It did. The British government, now led by the Whigs, was eager to cut its losses and, maybe more importantly, to drive a wedge between America and France. They quickly agreed to surprisingly generous terms.
So what did the Treaty of Paris of 1783 actually grant the U.S.?
First, formal recognition of independence. That was huge. Second, incredibly generous boundaries. West all the way to the Mississippi River, north to the Great Lakes, and south to Spanish Florida. Much more territory than the French might have supported.
Wow, that's basically the map of the eastern half of the U.S. What did the Americans have to give up in return?
Two main things, though they turned out to be tricky. Congress agreed to recommend that the states restore property confiscated from Loyalists, and they promised not to put any legal obstacles in the way of British merchants trying to collect pre-war debts owed by Americans.
Recommendations and promises.
Yeah.
Did the states actually follow through?
Largely, no. The recommendations about Loyalist property were mostly ignored, and collecting those debts proved very difficult. This caused friction with Britain down the road. But the immediate goal was achieved, and critically, like the expansion itself, the treaty negotiations completely ignored the Native Americans whose lands were being divided up.
So why were the British so generous with the boundaries, given they'd just lost the war?
It was shrewd diplomacy, really. The Whig government hoped generous terms would seduce America away from its alliance with France. They wanted to reopen trade routes and maybe prevent future conflicts over that vast Western territory by simply giving it to the U.S., sort of a let's be friends now move strategically.
Okay, so looking back at this whole tumultuous period, 1775 to 1783, what are the big takeaways? How did this unlikely victory happen?
Well, it really was a combination of things. You absolutely need the ideological fire, that commitment sparked by people like Paine and formalized by Jefferson in the Declaration, that sense of fighting for liberty.
Right, the ideas mattered.
Hugely. Then you need leadership. Washington wasn't maybe a tactical genius in every battle, but his resilience, his character, his ability to hold the Continental Army together through the absolute worst times like Valley Forge was indispensable.
And the colonists themselves, their persistence.
Definitely. Colonial resilience, the militias playing their part, the sheer difficulty the British had controlling such a vast territory. But you cannot overstate the importance of European help.
Saratoga opening the door.
Precisely. Saratoga convinced France to jump in, and that alliance brought money, troops, and especially the naval power that made Yorktown possible. The victory at Yorktown was as much French as it was American. Without France, it's very hard to see how the colonists could have won.
So, ideals, leadership, resilience, and critical foreign aid.
That seems to be the winning formula. But it's also clear that the revolution, born with these incredible declarations of liberty and equality, immediately ran into its own contradictions.
You mean like the slavery issue and who was actually included in We the People?
Exactly. The removal of that anti-slavery clause from the Declaration, Abigail Adams's plea to remember the ladies, the unresolved status of Native Americans, these tensions were baked in from the very beginning.
One final thought the text mentions. Compared to something like the French Revolution later on, the American Revolution ended, quote, in a remarkably peaceful way, internally at least. Why might that be?
That's a really interesting point for you, the listener, to think about. The source suggests maybe those pre-existing local experiences of self-government, the town meetings, the committees of correspondence we talked about, maybe they provided a kind of political stability, a framework that prevented the American cause from spiraling into the kind of chaos and terror seen in France.
So the practice of local democracy perhaps acted as a ballast.
It's a compelling argument to consider as you look at what came next, the challenge of actually building that republic.
A great question to ponder. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into how America seceded from the empire.